Hello, everyone. Hello, my name is Anya Madalinska. Welcome to our session on landscapes in the Americas. I represent Agrofloresta Mesoamericana, and I'm here because of the Youth in Landscapes movement. I'm honored to be here today with a panel of distinguished speakers who represent really a wealth of experience from different sectors of the environmental movement in Latin America. Among the speakers, we really have speakers from very different sectors. We have speakers who are the boots on the ground, the ones who are in the action, and also those who are the ones that shape both the national and international policy on environmental objectives. Latin American landscapes are rich and they're diverse, but they're also fragile. 6 of the 36 designated biodiversity hotspots of the world are in Latin America. Meanwhile, Latin America also hosts 25% of the world's degraded landscapes. But today, we have a panel of distinguished speakers who can help explain to us the complexity of these landscapes. To speak to us about these challenges, today with us, we have the Honorable Minister of the Environment and Natural Resources, Minister Lina Paul. She's the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of El Salvador. Minister Paul has been a champion of land restoration in her country, and she has also established a number of mechanisms for international collaboration on conservation in Latin America. Also with us, we have Marcos Terena. Marcos Terena is a leader of the indigenous movement whose career has really has elevated the voice of indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. He was the founder of the United Indigenous Nations, the first ever organization of indigenous peoples in Brazil. And throughout his career, he has been dedicated to promoting the voice of indigenous peoples to the forefront. Former President of Mexico, Felipe Calderón, joins us today as the chair of the commission, of the Global Commission of Economy and Climate, also known as the New Economy. Under his presidency, he presided over a very successful conference, International Climate Conference in Cancun, where he brought recognition to Mexico as an important player in the fight against climate change. Also from Brazil, we have with us Maria Margarita da Silva. Maria Margarita Ribeiro da Silva. Ms. Ribeiro is a grassroots leader who represents one of the largest extractivist reserves in Brazil. She has been fighting for decades to support local communities to achieve sustainable use of their forest landscapes and their forest resources. So I'd like to welcome all our panelists, and thank you very much for joining us. Okay, so to start off today's discussion, I would like to hear your thoughts on a point of pride in Latin America. And that point of pride is that the Americas are often characterized as as having very well-developed and very active civil societies and very well-established and strong environmental movements. So, I would like to ask you, what does it take to build social movements rooted in the landscapes approach, and what does it take to generate the political commitment to support these movements? I would like to start this discussion, please, with Mr. Marcos Terena, but also our panelists are welcome to pose questions amongst themselves and respond to each other's responses.
Hola, hola. ¿Escucha? Buena tarde.
Good Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. They don't answer. If there's no communication, can you hear me? This is the beginning of what we've done these days here, communication. And the question, what can we do to improve maybe not Mother Earth, but the life quality of you all and of my people too? And the person who came from India said many things very different to what we have in Brazil. In Brazil, they call us Indians, and United Nations, those who come from India call indigenous people. So where's the difference? The difference is that we are different. We are very different. I was looking at this picture. I don't know where it has been taken, but it's a habitat of that village that you can see there. I don't know what language they speak, German, Spanish, Italian, but the strength of Mother Earth that I see in Brazil, I can also see it here. Water, trees, nature. Therefore, to have such a discussion in 2 or 3 days, it's very important to attract the attention of people, to exchange ideas, proposals, and especially something that he said, money. We talk about money, trees, water. My concern and the concern of my people in Brazil is that in the future, water for the big countries will be a problem of money. Those who will have the money might be able to drink water. And then who will be the owner of the water? That's the big question that we are observing, us indigenous people, the war for water. And if we start here to promote, to exchange ideas, I think we'll be able to step forward, not towards negotiation, but for the reciprocity of our goods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marcos Terena. Would you like to add to this, Honorable Minister Lena Paul?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and for allowing us to participate in this conversation. As Sadhguru was saying, the most difficult thing is to plant a tree in the mind of people is the less fertile land. Environmentalists 20 years ago were seen as mad people, a little bit fatalistic, and with the climate change, not only the environment degradation, but with climate change, with human victims, and not only, but also with economic losses, recurrent economic losses, there we were taken a little bit more seriously. And I think that the environment movement became stronger and stronger. There were not only environment issues, but social, economic, fiscal issues in many of these economies. I will not only ask for the recording of said guru, but I will play it in my country. This is fundamental. If you see a problem with the tree cutting, don't go to the environment ministry, but to the economy ministry. I think that is fundamental. The environmental issue is not limited it's not limited like in the past. It's not an issue related to environmentalists or the environmental ministry, but it's something that we have to do. Those who cause the problem, we do not conceive an economy based on environment. The big buyers in the world are asking to include environmental issues. Bacardi, this is the way I drink rum Bacardi every day for environmental reasons. But Bacardi said, I'm not going to buy sugar in 2020 if it's not certified by Onsucro, which has very high environmental standards. So the economy is putting pressure to change behavior. The commitment is going beyond the environmental organizations, and it's arriving to those who must be committed with the landscape restoration, just to provide water for the next generations, to plant a tree in every corner of the country. That is every corner. And we need to be all committed, and the colleague has said it rightly so. We have to communicate, we have to provide data, we have to innovate, we have to use technology, but mainly we have to commit to adopt this land restoration approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, next we'd love to hear from President Felipe Calderón.
Gracias. Bueno, me alegra estar.
I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm continue with the argument of Madam Minister. The problem that I see with deforestation and with the devastation of forest jungles is that there are common and global goods: air, water, forest. And I reproduce what Inoko said this morning, is what the economists know as the tragedy of the commons. As they are goods of everybody, nobody takes care of them and everybody destroys them. We think in the Commission, the Global Commission for Environment and Climate, it is very important to give an economic value and to internalize those profits so that we can capture the externalities, the good that they can give back. And to do so, I will go through the environmental chain, the complete environmental chain. For example, the indigenous people in Mexico who are the owners of jungles and forests must eat. And some deforestation is due to the fact that the indigenous people, as an only resource, is the forest, is just to plant 1 or 2 hectares that give a little bit less than 100 euros per year as income. And the next season, he needs to plant another hectare. So we have to include the profits from those forests, and for that we have to pay for the profit of those trees, and we have to pay for environmental systems or ecosystem services.
Money in order to pay that, or even those companies. The guru was talking a few minutes ago about the companies polluting the rivers. So those companies must pay the pollution. Whoever polluted, he must pay, with no exception. Y nos lleva al otro problema que.
And this takes us to the problem, enforcement. We need for the authority to protect the indigenous people from attacks and to protect forests and to oblige those who pollute those who pollute water to pay for that water. And I conclude with the following. We have to find the huge economic value that we find in the landscape. And there are many examples. The forest plantation in our continent are profitable. They are a real business. They have a net positive value. And what we have to avoid, we need those plantations that and to recover those degraded forests. We need to break the long-term problems, and for that we need long-term financials. So the banks, the development banks, and the governments can play an important role. The money of the financial institutions, international financial institutions, must be there to reduce risk. And thirdly, the scale. The fact that farmers have got less than 1 hectare in Mexico and India and other countries means that they can't scale. And the work of the development banks should be to try to help and to bundle producers.
Get from sustainable production, either in forests or plantation, or something like that. La tasa de retorno, the rate of return en una plantación de teca.
The return tax is very high for some timber. So those plantations with those lands that have been abandoned in the Yucatan province due to decades of crops that are not given the yield, well, we need to break the cycle. We need to respect the communities, their organization, their cultural learning. Thank you.
Thank you for those thoughts, and thank you for that common thread that came out of all of your responses and the need to incorporate economic incentives into some of the solutions that we provide in landscapes. I'd like to come back to that, but before I'd like to finish off the first question with our speaker, Maria Margarita, Ms. Ribeiro. If you could please tell us a little bit of your thoughts on how. What is necessary in order to achieve political commitments towards landscape approaches, and what is critical to mobilize political commitments and to generate collective action to upscale these landscape approach solutions or sustainable solutions on the ground.
Boa tarde a todos e a todas.
Good afternoon to everybody.
O compromisso político se dá a partir da demanda, da necessidade das comunidades.
The political commitment is achieved as a result of the community's demands and needs.
O nosso exemplo, lá na Reserva Verde para Sempre, foi o conflito agrário, a invasão de madeireiro nas comunidades, que isso nos levou a demandar a regularização fundiária, solicitar do governo a regularização fundiária coletiva.
In our example, we experienced land conflicts, and we suffered from the invasion of legal loggers in our municipality, in our reserve, and we had to request a formal recognition.
Sim, aí nós solicitamos do governo o decreto, a construção da unidade de conservação.
Okay. So we requested the legal recognition of land rights from the preservation decree. Yeah, they made this request to the government, and they request the creation of a decree, the issue of a decree to guarantee the creation of the conservation unity.
Depois de solicitado, através das audiências públicas, em 2004, ele concedeu o decreto da Reserva Extrativista Verde para Sempre.
After making the request for the federal government, finally they approved the creation of the reserve in our municipality.
Em 2006, nós apresentamos a primeira proposta de plano de manejo comunitário.
In 2006, we presented the first proposal of the forest management plan.
Em seguida, com o nosso esforço, nós tivemos que construir uma instrução normativa que pudesse estar norteando essa proposta que a gente tem, uma vez que não tinha nenhuma lei que assegurasse.
Later,
com a nossa experiência, foi transformado em legislação nacional que instrui a atividade do manejo florestal comunitário em área protegida.
Okay. In our experience, the request was transformed in a legislation that attends the forest management plan.
Em seguida, foi convidada para participar das propostas da criação do Fundo Amazônia, com o motivo de assegurar que as iniciativas comunitárias possam receber apoio do fundo.
Later, I was asked to participate in the creation of the Amazon Fund with the aim of ensuring that the community initiatives could receive the support provided by the fund.
Fui também convidada para participar da reformulação do Código Florestal Brasileiro para que esse inclua um manejo florestal comunitário.
I was also asked to participate in the revision of the Brazilian Forest Code in order to guarantee the inclusion of the community forest management in the legislation.
Para criar ação coletiva a nível das comunidades, é preciso ter discussão nas comunidades para fomentar a criação de organizações sociais, apoio... Discussão nas comunidades para fomentar a criação de organizações sociais.
We should ensure the discussions in our communities in order to guarantee the forest management proposal, the execution of the forest management proposal.
Apoio financeiro inicial para a execução das atividades das organizações.
Initial finance support to allow the execution of the initiatives.
Fortalecimento das organizações sociais mediante capacitação sobre técnica florestal, gestão e empreendimento.
Also to ensure the capacity building for the communities.
Thank you very much for that example of a success story of how your movement was able to be incorporated into policy making, into the policy agenda. So maybe we could go back a little bit to the discussion that came around during the first question about the importance, because I heard a common theme about the importance of incorporating these economic incentives. President Calderon has already described a little bit of the mechanisms that can help to incorporate these economic incentives. I was wondering if we could hear from the other speakers as well. For example, Minister Lena Paul, how have you, from your experience, how have you been able to do this within your land reforestation efforts?
Gracias. Bueno,
Thank you. I will tell you in 3 minutes the program of restoration from El Salvador and what it means, this incentive programs, very quickly. And it can be summarized in 3 words that Karen mentioned from the World Bank. 3 things: information, innovation, and incentives. The 3 I's. It was extraordinary. Information, this is the first thing. We need information before the incentives. We need to know what there is in the country and what are the restoration opportunities. Therefore, we built a map of land use updated with a very high resolution. We use a certain technology that allowed us 1 to 1,000 resolution. So you can see everything in these satellite images, and I will not tell you what I saw and the reason why I'm divorced today. I'm not going to tell you the sin I saw. So you have a land map with a very high resolution, and then you build the transitions. And these are the current usage of land, and I need to bring restoration towards this. On top of that, we define wonderful maps to define priority areas for restoration with different criteria. Where do I want biodiversity, water, timber, climate? Where do I want to reduce risks because of floodings, for example? So we had some restoration maps, and on top of it, we define costs, how much it costs, and not only at an economic level, but also at a financial level, the restorations or the viable or profitable transition. So we defined the restoration techniques. We included all the old knowledge, and we defined not only those restoration techniques, but the most important assets of the country that needed to be preserved, drinking water plans, etc. And what are the restoration areas that would support and would stay at the basis of that healthy restoration? We innovated. We had new techniques for the whole country. To restore doesn't mean to plant a tree only. It would be easy to plant a tree, to maintain it, to work the land, etc. Therefore, we defined all those restoration techniques in an innovative way. And finally, we were left with the incentive framework. How do we do it? And I was asking the former President Calderon, how can we convince presidents that sometimes live in a fiscal crisis, almost on default, or with very high violence? How can we convince them, not only the government, but also the main economic stakeholders, banks? How do we convince them? How do I convince a bank that if you invest $1 in restoration, your yield will be $10 or $15 in economic profits? How can you communicate that? And which incentives needed to be created depending on the transition of the restoration and depending on the restoration techniques and the level of innovation? And how a small country like El Salvador, with no big forests like Brazil, Congo, or China, but with very serious problems related to climate change, and we need to adapt. And climate financing is not geared towards small countries. We're not sexy for the international cooperation or the climate cooperation. How can we do it? And we need to create those incentives. We need to mobilize the national private sector. We need to mobilize the national banks to restore, to really restore, and to restore seriously, not only planting trees, but transforming the landscape, renewing the landscape. That's the big task related to economic incentives. And I'm really sorry. Yes, the private sector is accountable for this current situation, but without the private sector, we can't do the transition, and therefore we won't be able to transform, we won't be able to restore. How can we include this sector? And this is our biggest fight, to plant tree in a land that is not so fertile, like minds and hearts, and not of politicians. Politicians are very good people, really. But those who move the world, and to make them understand that we only have one planet and these are common goods, and common goods for everybody. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that, President Calderon?
There was a question, or no, I can react a little bit. Yes.
Yes.
No.
I absolutely agree with Madam Minister. For me, the problem was not to convince the president. I was the president. I had to convince my ministers and the members of parliament. We have a problem in democracy. I submitted a budget and a law to enhance the payments for environmental goals, and we increased we made the budget threefold. 38% was the rise in these budgets during my government. But in the parliament, I didn't have a majority, and there were members of parliament representing the agricultural sector from all the parties, and they defended their interests. So we were pushing to implement programs in order to reconcile these two aspects, because we have to deal with forestry and with agriculture. But these members of parliament were pushing against it. They were agreeing among themselves subsidies we had already annulled. So there were many perverse incentives in order to act against the market. So this is a very hard task in politics, but we have to do it. And there is no bigger strength than the strength of the citizens and of public opinion. So please do not allow any politician to act against the environment. I know there are some borderline subjects, issues, and there are subjects which are really tough, and sometimes you have to be able to compromise. But do not compromise in environmental issues. Do not accept any compromises from the politicians. We have to really build a high wall, not allowing them to go beyond that point.
Before we finish the session, I would like to move on to kind of a closing question for all of you. And that is, what are your personal commitments to ensuring what you have spoken about today, to ensuring that economic incentives are taken into consideration, that and that civil society movements continue to have their presence in political agendas? Could you speak a little bit towards that, about what your personal commitments are, and how you intend to continue to work on those in the coming years? Could we start maybe with Mr. Terena?
Bueno, inicialmente quiero.
First of all, I would like to thank you, those who have been listening to us here all the time, And I would like to thank the organization who invited me to come from Brazil, all the way from Brazil to Bonn. And I thank all of you, all who are listening to my words here in these few minutes we have left. Anya has asked me a question, but I would like to thank Anya as well. She is an agricultural expert from Poland. I met her today. And we have already shared some ideas here in the framework of this debate, also with former President Felipe and with our Lady Minister for the Environment and our colleague from Brazil. These are very different people from different countries. Maria, she lives in the Amazon in Brazil. And I would like to thank you all and also make a few remarks since we are coming to an end. The first time I was in New York in 1991, I was there in the Summit for Indigenous People talking about sustainability and development. The United Nations invited me to talk there, to come to New York, in order to try and organize the indigenous voice within the United Nations. And this should be an example for you. This is my personal experience as an indigenous person. I didn't have any other language, just my indigenous language. And I got to know two elements of the modern world. I got to know a train, and then also the word of the missionaries from the United States. When I was in New York, I read a sentence which made a big impression for me, for the organization of our summit. This was the statement I read. Time is money. So that's why I would like to ask you to think why you're here. What brought you here? To be here 2 or 3 days. I am always very cold. In my community, we don't use any clothing. Well, now, every now and then we use shorts because civilization told us to use clothes. Now we feel embarrassed. We are very aware of our bodies. So we were trying to articulate this indigenous thinking with 92 indigenous communities from all over the world, from Mexico, from El Salvador, from Africa, Asia, Europe, Germans, Swiss people. They were all looking forward to hearing what we had to say. So, what was the message we wanted to convey to the world? Something that could be interesting for everybody. Water, soil, and biodiversity. At that time, we called it something else. Hunger, wealth, poverty. So we went back to our wise men and asked them, what could we say? What could be the interesting statement for everybody? And they told us, we walk towards the future. And we do it, we follow the steps of our ancestors. That's very simple. What are the ancestors here in Bonn, in Germany, in Mexico, in Brazil? For me, my ancestors are my grandparents. They taught me how to live in this world. And who are your ancestors? The fight is not over. And now, to close my contribution, when I came to Bonn after traveling for a whole day from Brazil, I saw a man, very tall man, 2 meters high, the typical white man, really big, tall man, with a very elegant tie around his neck. And he told me, "Are you Terena?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I was wondering, who is he? Before I came to Europe, I was told, please take care, there are bombs in planes, in airports, and especially the people with a lot of hair in their faces, they are very dangerous. Take care. That's what the chauffeur told me. The driver of the car warned me. He was driving a Mercedes. I think that's a German car, right? German car maker. And in Brazil, if you have a Mercedes, you are very rich. I had never been in a Mercedes before. So I was really impressed. I thought to myself, does it mean I'm a rich man now? So these issues, environment, green economy, sustainability, these are very important issues. And we have a lot of plans about these issues. But the most important thing is that you teach your children what is the currency of the future, the currency for quality of life. So I came here to tell you that there is not money enough in this world to pay for this forest, for the rivers, for the rain. There is no money to buy that. The money, the currency you have to use is in your hearts. You have to use that currency. That's all. Thank you.
For reminding us that the important thing with our future commitments is to keep those objectives in mind and to keep that close to our hearts. So I'd like to thank everybody for your participation. Certainly covering landscapes of boundless riches and biodiversity, as Mr. Terena mentioned. Much is at stake in the Americas, but I'm hopeful that the experience of these panelists and the lessons they have learned can help us continue to affect positive change in the future. Thank you, everyone. Before we finish, I'd like to also ask all of you to move over to that side of the stage so we could take a photo at the request of the organizers. Thank you.